All right, we are live. Welcome back to another episode of Wellness Unplugged. I'm not bringing you one awesome guest. I'm actually bringing you a superhuman duo all the way from the UK, except, are you currently in the UK?
No, we're currently in Thailand at the moment.
Okay. I was looking at the time that we were recording this and thinking this would be like 1:30 or 1:45 in the morning UK time, and it'd be awfully early or late for you to get up and be recording this conversation. So how's the weather in Thailand?
Wet.
It's like the rainy season.
1 minute is a thunderstorm, the next minute is beautiful sunshine, which is nice.
Nice. So, do you reside in Thailand currently? Like that's your country of residence, or are you just vacationing there?
We do, yeah. We recently moved here, so we actually spent. So obviously, as you said, we're from the UK. We spent a good 7 years living in the UAE in the Middle East, and then we went back to the UK for about a year with the COVID situation, and then we actually decided no. Where do we want to be? And for a long time, we've been planning Thailand, and here we are. So it's been about 3 months now.
Yep, and forevermore.
How do you like the humidity and the bugs compared to the UK?
Well, the humidity we were used to because of living in the UAE. But the bugs, not so bad.
No, not so bad. It's quite, the mosquitoes a little bit. Yeah, but everything else is quite nice to have a bit of nature around.
Are you picking up any Thai phrases?
Hello, thank you.
And that's it.
Ask us in a year from now.
Yeah. We were in Bangkok not too long after they'd been significantly flooded, so it was a bit of an interesting time to be there. So, but I'd love to go back there and spend more time there. Are you anywhere near the beach?
Yeah. So we're in Koh Samui at the moment. So basically everywhere you are in Koh Samui is by the beach because it's a small island kind of.
Fair enough. So the title that I put on this broadcast, you didn't actually see it, but I put a title on this broadcast, and it was, "Is it possible to live stress-free in 2021?" Because you work with people to help them alleviate stress, but there was probably a point in time in both of your lives where you were feeling the crippling effects of stress, because very rarely do you meet someone in the wellness sphere who's doing this just to make a buck. They're doing this because they've experienced something in their own life. They went for solutions, couldn't find the answers they were looking for, or when they did, they finally had to cobble something together on their own, and that ultimately leads you to what you do now. So maybe let's start with Charlotte. What was life like before you were a part of Wellness Theory?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thank you so much for sharing what you just did. This is so true about like people cobbling together kind of now what it is they do as a result of that. It's just so authentic to how it works, and I think that's where like the power comes from, right? It is that personal experience, and then the sentiment behind everything you then do is so much stronger. So for me, before the Wellness Theory, I was working in corporate fitness space. I had always been a gym instructor, personal trainer, fitness management, and various other roles within that industry. And it was awesome in terms of a career path, but it was something I kind of fell into more than anything. But I think I fell into it because there were many things going on internally, which I think I was probably trying to deal with, and I didn't realize it at that time. So I experienced a few different kind of childhood traumas and things like that. And then I very heavily went into escapism and, drinking alcohol and, trying to almost stop myself from spiraling and throwing myself into like my work was like the thing that was like my pattern and my common theme. And then over time, different experiences, life experience happened, as you know. And then I got to a point, fast forward like 10 years, and I was living in the Middle East. I found myself emotionally eating. I found myself with very, very negative thoughts, suicidal ideation. I was like withdrawing from other people. I felt extremely lonely. And what I didn't know at the time is that it was all of that stuff coming up, right? All of those emotions that I'd never really paid attention to. So I didn't have any emotional awareness really. I was just full of this emotional charge, and it was manifesting itself in so many ways that were just alien to me, right? I was working in fitness, right? Yeah. How on earth am I experiencing all of this? And it made me feel like such a hypocrite at times.
Yeah, there's this funny paradox that you're in fitness helping people apparently live healthier lives while you're busy living a destructive lifestyle on your own. Yeah. And so because I imagine there's a number of people out there that do struggle with alcohol. What kind of role was, if I may ask, what kind of role was alcohol playing in your life, and maybe how did you gradually like break free from its grip?
Yeah, so I wouldn't go as far as to say it was like alcoholism in the sense of, being diagnosed and going through recovery and this kind of thing from an addiction standpoint, but it was my sense of escape.
Yeah.
Right. So I was 13 years old and I had a locker at school that had whiskey in it. Right. But what the weird thing is I'm sitting here now saying, but it's not a problem, right? It was never a problem to the point of addiction. It was a form of escapism. It wasn't that I was drinking every day. It wasn't that I was doing, drinking bottles after bottles after bottles. It was just, that was my go-to thing. And I think that just helped me to numb whatever it was I was experiencing. And that obviously in itself has many unhealthy consequences, which kind of led me down that path. But a big part of it was recognizing, okay, what am I trying to escape from? Like, why am I using alcohol? And for me, I modeled it, right? So it was in my environment, parents drinking, this kind of thing. So for me, it was the easy thing. It was the thing to do, right? That's all I knew until there was an alternative.
So then did it feel like, when you shifted to becoming kind of a workaholic, this was a different type of escapism? Was it maybe a more socially acceptable one than alcohol, or were they kind of, in tandem?
No, it definitely was more of a socially acceptable form of escapism, but I didn't realize it was escapism until like now, right? Until I'm kind of on the other side of the fence. Like at the time, it was brilliant because I was thriving in my work. I was doing so well, and I think that just became a more positive form of escapism until I got to a point where I was like, hey, how I got here? What am I doing? I got to a point where I was in the highest position I could be in the company that I was working for. There's only 3 roles that exist in the entire world, and I got one of those roles, and I was like, what am I doing? Like, I got there and I was like, well, what is this? Right? And it was like, there was so many things that were misaligned with where I was in my life and the purpose and impact I wanted to make. And I think that was when that wake up call really started to come into fruition.
So people would have looked at you and they would have had quite a bit of envy for the position that you held. You mentioned it was like in the corporate wellness space. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
And so for those who might not understand what it looks like, what are we referring to when we say the corporate wellness space?
So really that was like, the big gym chains. Yeah. It's really good kind of climbing your way up that ladder. So it's still very much in the fitness space. But for me, it was a national fitness programming role that I was in, which meant I was responsible for all of the programming within facilities across the GCC. So multiple countries, multiple teams, multiple different pressures that come with that. But there was a big part that was so authentic, but there were other parts that just didn't sit right. And I think that was when it was just time to evolve into what is now wellness theory.
Yeah, so it really felt like kind of it began to feel like just a totally empty thing. Here you are in this enviable life that other people would, I don't know, maybe punt a puppy across a football field to try and get into your shoes, and you're sitting here thinking like, this is not what I want. It actually feels really empty and hollow.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's funny as well is that it's like nobody on the outside would have known that, right? At all. It was like behind closed doors, there was this spiraling happening. There's always been this dance between spiraling and thriving for me. And now finally, I now obviously get that. I understand it. I can see where does that pattern come from? What is that theme? I can see, okay, well, what does it mean to truly thrive now? And I think that's the dance that's always been present.
I love that, the dance between like spiraling and thriving. And in the 21st century, and in fact in 2020 and 2021 in particular, there's a lot of escapist type behaviors happening. And there's a lot of people who really aren't seeing a lot of things to feel hopeful about, and they're feeling the weight of a lot of pressure sitting on their shoulders. And so, but I want to shift gears here because you got a very handsome gentleman beside you there, and I think he has a bit of a story to tell as well. And so, Jonathan, maybe we could dive into. Well, first of all, you have the same name as I do, so like clearly you're legendary. So you could also, and just a slightly different accent. But what is kind of your connection to stress, and how is it sort of breaking you down?
Well, literally this year is my 20th year in the health and wellness space. I started in 2001. I started doing martial arts at the age of 16. Just getting to the age of 16, and I loved it. And literally that kind of confirmed my decision to go into learning more about sports and stuff. So at that point, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was like I was leaving school and go, I don't want to go to university. I don't want to do this. What do I want to do? Started doing martial arts, and I thought, okay, I love this. I'm going to do something sport related. So that's kind of the direction I went down. I started working in gyms, started getting my qualification as a fitness instructor, personal trainer. And then that was it, pretty much. It just kind of snowballed from there. It just got deeper and deeper into the fitness, the health and fitness space. And I started working for myself initially. Then I started working for smaller gyms and bigger gyms. And the first 10 years of my career, the first 10 years of my time in health and fitness was, I think, very kind of, it was a struggle. It was kind of a lot of suffering for me because mainly I didn't really know what I wanted, but I didn't know that at the time. I literally went to the opposite side of kind of Charlotte. I went to the obsession of healthy eating, training all the time, not socializing, not going out, not going to restaurants. I would eat literally chicken, rice, and broccoli pretty much every day, 10 eggs every day. I'd be so strict with how I ate, how I trained, what I would do, to the point I would sacrifice relationships, I'd sacrifice socializing, friendships, just to look and feel and do what I thought I had to do in this space to be able to present myself as like a good
credible
trainer, as a credible health and fitness professional. And I was literally just killing myself on every front. Stress, stress didn't even come into the thing. I didn't even know what they were. It was like I was just pushing myself day in, day out. I would wake up early, go to the gym, then I'd go to work. I would leave work, I'd go to the gym again. And then when I started working in a gym, that was a different story. I was like training all the time, training with clients. I was eating obsessively what I thought was healthy at the time, but turned out to be very, very unresourceful for me, should I say. And that just kept suffering with pain, with anger issues, with aggression, with exhaustion, all these things. And I got to the point where I thought, okay, this must be normal. Like, this must be the part of being in the health and fitness industry. Like, you're working long hours, you're training so much that you're in pain constantly. You have to eat very strict, and you have to sacrifice all this. And I went through this, like, the first 10 years of my career, suffering and killing myself, thinking this is what I had to do. And
because we hear the hustle and grind message. If you're not
exactly.
and maybe you'd built this enviable physique, so people look at you and go like, wow, look at this guy, he looks ripped or shredded or huge or jacked or whatever terminology you want to use, and inside you're kind of the Hulk, the Incredible Hulk here.
That was my nickname. I was the Hulk because I was such an angry person. My temper was so bad back then in those first 10 years. That was my nickname. And then I was the Hulk because I used to snap change so quickly. And again, like you said, my goal was I had to get my body fat to single digits. I had to look the part, because if I didn't look the part, I was incredible as a personal trainer. No one's going to trust me. No one's going to work with me, all this stuff. And I just remember getting to that point. I got to 8% body fat. I had a photo shoot. I'd done all this stuff that you're supposed to do as a personal trainer. And I felt completely unfulfilled. I felt exhausted. I was in so much pain. About 10 years, around that 10-year mark, I started to experience a lot of pain that wasn't related to gym activities. I was starting chronic pain, especially in my back, and I experienced that for 4 years, debilitating to the point where I couldn't train anywhere near as hard as I could. Some days I couldn't train at all, and some days it was so bad it would affect my vision. Literally, the pain would just draw it up into my head, and my vision would blur. And I seeked out all the help I could. I saw physios, I saw chiropractors, I saw doctors, I had injections in my spine. I literally done everything, and everything gave a short-term effect. I was good for about a week, and then it just came straight back again. It wasn't until I started to kind of step out of the physical side of it in terms of training all the time, eating, and I started to step away and go, okay, look, nothing's working. What should I do? So what can I do? And that's when I started to kind of become a little bit more aware of what's happening. I started to ask different questions. Life is not supposed to be this hard. It's not supposed to be this painful. So and I started to look at different alternatives, and that's when I started to look into more meditation, breath work, or the other side of the spectrum, which is emotions and mental health.
I think I can very much enter into that because I got into the powerlifting world, and I wanted to get lift the heaviest things I could possibly lift. I wanted to get as strong as possible. I was getting up trying to train 2 hours a day, but I was probably only sleeping 5 hours a night. Eventually having multiple panic attacks, and so I can really enter into maybe a lot of what you were experiencing. I was very, very short tempered with my long suffering wife. As well, because I was working so hard, but I think I was angry that I was working so hard and not getting to where I was trying to go. And so, I definitely, I can kind of understand that. So where did you and Charlotte get connected in this picture here?
It was funny actually, because we both worked for the same company back in the UK, and we was having just a very casual breakfast with a friend in common. We didn't really know each other very well, and he was so happy, and he's not. That was unusual for him, right? He was the Hulk, and I was like, what's going on with you? And he's like, oh, I'm leaving to go to Dubai, because he got this job in Dubai. And I jokingly said, well, if there's any opportunities, let me know, right? As we said goodbye, and then lo and behold, a few weeks later, he reaches out with a job opportunity. Me being in my search for escapism, thought, fantastic, that ticks all the boxes, thriving in career, can escape some more, fantastic. And there I was on a plane over there into the Middle East, and we ended up actually working relatively close together, for this other company, we did not get on at all in the beginning, because I was still going through my spiraling internally. He was going through his Hulk stuff still. We had a big clash, didn't we? And it was only until we both kind of just decided, okay, well, at what point is enough? And then we kind of both went and did our own work, as it were, and obviously we still do. At some point we just come together as a couple, and then we're just so aligned in what our mission is that we ended up giving birth to Wellness Theory.
Exactly. So it's marrying both our skill sets and what we know, and to basically help other people to understand that it's to not get to the stage that we did as well. And I know other people have got way beyond what we've got to as well. We've had clients who've experienced way much more suffering than we did, but everyone's got their own journey. And our goal is to help people to understand that what they're going through is normal, but that prolonged suffering is not. And it's important to realize that when we say about helping people relieve stress, it's not getting rid of stress because you can't. Stress is a natural part of life, but it's understanding how to use it and what's resourceful for you and what's not. And that's what we help people to understand is if you have these reactions or you're feeling a certain way, it's okay. Okay. It's not wrong. It's not right. It's not good. It's not bad. It's just understanding. And that's what was kind of the game changer for me, was that level of awareness and understanding that what I was doing might have served me at the beginning, but it doesn't anymore. And that's why I was suffering. That's why everything was becoming so much more challenging and harder. So I had to adapt as I went along to be able to get rid of the unhealthy stress and only experience healthy stress when it's needed to help me grow and adapt and become stronger and more resilient. And that was kind of the, I think, game changer for both of us when we started to realize that is that stress underpins everything that happens in our life. Mental, emotional, physical, financial, relationships, all this stuff, it all comes back down to stress. And not not being able to understand it, and also not being able to deal with it in a healthy, resourceful way.
Yeah, so you guys got to the point where you had an epic bloat, or maybe there was more than one epic bloat. Were you a couple at that point in time when sort of these sort of butting heads was happening?
Not initially, no. So when we first started working together, we weren't a couple, even though people thought we were. Because outside of work, we'd hang out and we were fine. It was in work was a big problem. we didn't get on. Because obviously at that time I was always right and everything I done was right. Because that's the way I thought. So it was my way on that way. It was only when I went to a different club, a different location. Was after that we kind of got together initially, but that didn't work out the first time because again we were both we didn't even know what we wanted for each other, let alone for like ourselves as a couple.
I was still trying to escape, right? Not the relationship.
So did the penny drop for both of you at the same time, or was it like for one?
It was around the same time period. It doesn't happen on one day and one moment. There's
of course.
Great moments that happen and shifts that happen. And I think we was going through it around the same time. And what was nice though is that we could share that with each other. what we was experiencing. So yeah, it was definitely the same time period.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, it was within like a kind of space of a few months of that kind of work we're doing, having that kind of light bulb moment and going, okay, this is what it's meant to be like.
You were kind of growing together, and I think that's not a bad thing, actually, because I think there's people out there, there's couples out there, they experience conflict and they're butting heads and things like that. What would you say to a couple? Let's say they're butting heads, they're kind of tired of butting heads with each other, but they don't really know how to break the pattern.
They need to, one, figure out what's their intention, right? Not just for the relationship, but for themselves, for their life. What is the intention that's driving them, full stop, right? Like, there's no point messing around with trying to just do the date night on a Friday or whatever, and those kind of surface level fixes. We need to go inward. We need to take that time and look at, okay, what's my intention and what am I resisting when we're butting heads, when it's coming up? Because it's just too common that we're being driven by unnecessary emotional charge from past experience, and that's usually the driving force. It's not because you want to butt heads, right? When you're in a relationship, you don't even want to butt heads. You just find yourself doing it, and it's just not healthy, right?
Kind of the primal part of your brain takes over. You get into a defensive mechanism, like your sense of identity is being threatened or being challenged. The way you see the world, your perspective, it's all being threatened, and it triggers this animal response. And yeah, you find yourself deeply entrenched in these things. So you mentioned like going deeper within yourself, and for a lot of people that might sound, one, scary, like, oh my gosh, like this is, or really out there. What do you mean going deeper within yourself? How do I, and they might be trying to understand, well, what does that even look like in kind of a real world practical application? So maybe you could unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, great question. So for me personally, it was when I got to the point where I had no choice to go inward. The other option is like the end, right? I was at a point where I was like rock bottom, something's going to give. Like, I literally suicidal ideation, and it was like that. This is the alternative. So what is the other thing is to listen. What is going on? Why is this happening? I started to question. And I think question is the best place to start for anybody that might be looking to go within. And that's just asking a question that you genuinely care about the answer to, and just see what comes up. What's the next thought that follows that? What's the emotion that follows the question? And when we start to actually pay attention to that, maybe we write it down, maybe we just listen and kind of pay attention to it. But what we tend to do, which is the most common like mistake people make, is they'll either ask a question in like kind of like a victim mindset of why is this happening to me kind of thing, rather than asking the question of, okay, what is being presented for me right now? And why would this be presented for me right now? Because when we start to ask that question, we become so much more available to different answers. And I think just paying attention to that is a great starting point.
Yeah, and I think this is really valuable what you're sharing here, because let's say people right now, if they, for example, if they go to thewellnesstheory.com, they check out your website, they're going to see two people who look like they have it all together, that, like, you're living in Thailand, you're living near the beach, you've really dealt with a lot of your inner turmoil and so on. Sometimes it might feel like there's a bit of disconnect between where they're at and where you're at, and they might even be intimidated trying to connect with you and communicate with you. It's like seeing someone as a type of guru. What would you say to people that might be feeling like that when they see like your story and where you're at presently in life?
I think the first thing is we're definitely not gurus, and we definitely haven't got it all together. No one has. It's like life is a constant, it's constant growth, it's constant adaptation, and we still go through our own things now and again. Like for me, my biggest impact in the past was I had no emotional intelligence. I had no idea what I was feeling, or I couldn't even name the emotions I was feeling except for anger. That was my primary one. I was still growing up. Like, obviously, my role model was my dad, and he's old school. Like, men don't show emotions. Like, you don't show compassion. You joke about it. You make sarcastic comments, and you show anger. That's it. That's what a man does. And it took me a while to get out of that mindset, and that's something I still work on now, because that's conditioning from many years in the past, and sometimes that still comes up. And I know when it comes up, usually when I'm tired or hungry, is when it tends to like the intensity comes back again. So for me, I know what triggers it, and I know that I've still got work to do on myself, and we all have. You never get to a point where I'm 100% perfect. I'm superhuman. Like, it doesn't exist.
That's
and
the ego.
That's the ego. Exactly. That's the ego.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Just to understand that we're always growing, we're always improving. And it doesn't matter where you get to, there's never a stopping point. You're always working on yourself to become a better version of yourself for the rest of your life.
Yeah, it's like this challenge to unwire your brain. It's a really interesting and sometimes uncomfortable place to be, where you recognize that there's something that needs to be fixed, and I'm even aware that it needs to be fixed, and maybe even aware of the steps I need to take to fix it, but you can't really speed the process up. And you kind of have to, it comes up and then you kind of metabolize it, and you've grown a little bit. It comes up again, you metabolize it, you grow a little bit more, and so on. So what would you say to someone who's in that place where they recognize, I need to make the change, I want to make the change, I even know what I need to do to make the change, but I can't speed the process up? What would you say to people in that situation?
I get them to explore what's the resistance. Let go of the resistance, right? Don't try and figure out and tell yourself you can't do something, or you're not ready to do it, or you know everything and you're ready to go. It is actually the resistance that's the issue. So rather than really projecting where they want to be, is just take stock, respect where you are, honor where you are on that journey, because we're all somewhere on the spectrum.
Yeah.
Right? It's just that we're at different markers. And I think that's just the key. It's just honoring where we are, and just having that level of respect for yourself, and just say it's okay, right? The minute you say it's okay that I'm where I am and I'm not taking action now, but I know maybe what I need to do, that's okay. Because the minute you start to accept that that's okay, the resistance falls away.
Yeah, absolutely. And you use the term honor where you're at. And I'm in the coaching space, and I've worked with life coaches and things, and so I have an understanding of what we're referring to here. But for someone who's again, who might be hearing these sort of linguistic terms for the first time, what does it look like in a practical sense to kind of honor where you're at? I know it's really hard because it's kind of an intangible thing, but what are you picturing, or what are you trying to describe for people when you say honor where you're presently at in the journey?
I would get somebody to just imagine for a moment in the context of somebody else. So let's say, for example, a newborn baby comes into the world. Maybe you're a parent watching, listening to this, or I'm sure you've been exposed to a child at some point in your life. You were one, right?
I do have a 7-month-old, so.
Oh, yeah, perfect, beautiful. So 7-month-old, when he's crying, I'm sure there's times where maybe you're wishing that he would stop, right? I'm sure that comes up. But the reality is you're not judging him for being 7-month-old and crying. Right? Yeah. You're honoring where he is. You're like, he's a baby. He's a cute little baby. And immediately you're honoring him just through that mindset and that attitude towards him. I think if we can then just start to mirror that within ourselves at certain moments, I think that's where probably the truest real life example of honor can come from.
I love analogies, and that's a really, really great picture. And I think really you're also kind of, in a sense, alluding to having compassion towards yourself. And I speak a lot in my own work about self-compassion and how it's absolutely crucial. Jonathan, maybe you've experienced this. I found that in the masculine space in particular, self-compassion is a really difficult thing, and very few men are even wanting to talk about it. It's often perceived as a type of weakness, and yet it was like in my own journey, it was the impetus for me losing 100 pounds and keeping it off permanently is when I stopped hating myself, being angry at myself, abusing myself, and actually started treating myself with compassion. What's kind of been your journey? Because you talked about sort of the masculine wiring and sort of the masculine experience you have. What's been kind of your journey with compassion and self-compassion as a male?
I had none back then for myself. I was always trying to think, I need to look this way. I need to get to this shape. I need to act like this. I need to do this to be accepted. And again, that was that ego coming in again. It's like, my ego is, okay, I'm a man. I'm into fitness. I've got to have a 6-pack. I've got to be ripped. I've got to act a certain way. I can't show emotion. I've got to be this image I thought that I had to be. And that caused me a lot of suffering, caused me a lot of pain and a lot of unfulfillment. And it did take me a while to get to that realization and that awareness that, okay, I don't have to look a certain way. I don't have to eat a certain way. I don't have to train a certain way. I don't have to act a certain way. I only have to act. I have to do what I want to do. I have to do what's good for me. And the only way to do that is by being kind to myself, is literally letting it go a bit. And the biggest one for me was letting go the strictness of how I was eating. Because I was eating for years, well over a decade. I was so strict, and trying to be more relaxed with that was very hard for me initially, because I thought if I'm relaxed with that, my body fat's going to increase. I'm going to lose my 6-pack. I'm going to lose definition. And the funny thing is, back then I was hovering around 10-11% on average, all the time. I think now I'm probably about 18, 19. And I've got a lot less pain, no pain, much more feels. I enjoy what I eat now. I enjoy how I train because I listen to my body. I'm more compassionate. I don't judge myself for what I do. If I think I don't want to train one day, okay, I'm not going to train. I'll do something else. If I don't want to eat a certain food and I think I want to eat something else, I'll have it, and I won't judge myself for it, because at the end of the day, I'm just going to listen to my body, what my body wants. And as I listen, I start to get signals. Like, for example, I'll give you a very powerful example. I mentioned earlier when I suffered from chronic pain for 4 years. What changed that? Literally for 4 years, trying everything, nothing happened. I managed to flip that around in 2 weeks by calming my nervous system down and bringing myself back into my body in terms of listening to myself, and focusing on breath work was a huge thing for me. And I basically brought my nervous system back down and brought my body into a state of what we call parasympathetics, that's rest and digest, and allowed my body to recover. And what I realized was all this pain was a lot stored emotions and thoughts and feelings, and that weren't being resolved, weren't being focused on, and weren't being let go, they weren't being released, they were being stuck within my body. And when I started to bring everything back down and started to focus on my breath, bring myself back into my body, the pain started to go. And 2 weeks later, literally pain was gone. After 4 years, the pain just went. I stood up and I thought, oh my God, like I can move and I've got no pain. But obviously, like it didn't, at that point, old me would have gone, okay, great, I can go back to what I was doing. But it was, okay, this is interesting. It's like 4 years of trying everything from the outside world, that didn't work. And now focusing on the inside world, and it was gone in 2 weeks. And what I realized, there was times where I let things get in the way, and I stopped doing my breathing. I stopped being more mindful of how I move and how I eat, and the pain started to come back again. And I was going, okay, there's a correlation here. It's like, if I don't look after myself, my body is giving me signals, which is in my regard was pain. My pain was my signal from my body telling me you're not looking after yourself from the inside out. So when I started looking after myself again and started focusing on my breath, started listening to my body and connecting with myself in terms of how I eat, how I move, how I breathe, how I think, how I feel, then again, the pain went again. And I felt lighter, I felt more free. And that is it was such a powerful realization for me in terms of that awareness is everything my body is doing from a physical standpoint is a signal telling me how well my internal world is functioning. So if my body not functioning how I want it to, if it feels heavy, if it feels challenging, if it feels like hard to do something and it shouldn't do, that's my body telling me you're not connected. Like internally, something is not aligned with what it is you actually need. And then I just put myself back in. I focus on my breath, do something called a body scan.
I was going to say, mind body scan is huge.
Yeah.
So, because you're totally speaking my language now, because I love this, because I think we massively neglect the health of our nervous system. Very few people actually talk about the physical network of nerves we have in our body, and of course the brain being the CPU of our nervous system. But we don't talk about these things. We don't talk about it as health. Like, I know I was living on stimulants, ephedrine, caffeine, pre-workout, energy drinks, all these kinds of things, trying to force my body to do stuff. And here you are talking about tapping into your internal world. And again, for people listening, they might think, well, that sounds a little bit woo-woo. I mean, but, and just because you live in Thailand doesn't mean you're necessarily going to a temple and burning incense and humming to tap into your internal world. What does it look like to, I mean, I kind of know the answer, but I want to hear it in your words, of course. What does it look like to sort of tap, especially from a male perspective? Because again, this is things that men very rarely talk about. So to tap into your inner world. Go ahead.
I just want to add something to what John was just saying, because I think he missed a crucial thing around the one of the key things that helped him shift from that masculine exterior of I should look like this or identify like that, was when you was in the Middle East. Jonathan did it was like a leadership thing actually under Robin Sharma's team, and in that experience he had some big shifts specifically at that time, but a big part of that was being vulnerable, by being surrounded by other people who were of a certain level, should we say, in terms of their I would say
Status,
ego, really,
yeah.
but in terms of
Yeah.
status, yeah, like these are people that have money, they are powerful, they are men, do not show emotions, they're coming from the Emirati background where it's even more of a no-no that you share things like that. And I think that was a big shift that I got to observe. He was able to suddenly be a lot more vulnerable. And I think not just in that situation, but I think that carried through into everything else, which has been very, very powerful in terms of you keeping that change.
Definitely. It's just interesting to see at that point when you expect, or like when you hear on social media or on the news, all these powerful so-called quote unquote successful people, because they got obviously high positions, loads of money, and they're in the same room as you and they're struggling with the same stuff. Or at some point they like, you realize that, oh, okay, these people are about twice my age. They asking questions that I asked years ago, like to kind of listen. I thought, okay, this is interesting. So I thought like everyone at that position, that status, had everything sorted, and that was a kind of realization that it doesn't matter how old you are, what position you have, what status you have. It means absolutely nothing when it comes to how connected you are with yourself mentally, physically, and emotionally. From the outside, things can look amazing. From the inside, things can be falling apart and crumbling apart massively.
Yeah. And that's huge, because I think in one sense, seeing people accumulate massive amounts of wealth and figuring out that actually isn't still leading to a sense of a fulfilled life. And this isn't to denigrate money or pursuing, financial success but when you're using it to kind of fill a void that it can't fill, you're just going to ultimately end up feeling empty. It sounds like you're getting in touch or have really kind of gotten in touch in a sense with almost like a feminine type of energy as well. And a lot of men would hear that and actually all of a sudden shrink away in fear when they hear something like a man experiencing what we might call like a feminine type of energy. And I'm sort of deliberately steering this way because I'm also hugely an empath, and I'm 6'1", 235, like I'm a big dude, and so a lot of people have certain ideas about me when in truth I just like to hug everybody I meet because I'm actually a real gentle-hearted soul. But do you feel like as you kind of got in touch with this more emotionally connected side of yourself, that in any way that you were less of a man than when you were, really filled with a lot more masculine, aggressive type energy?
One thing I realized that obviously I learned a lot was everyone has masculine and feminine energy. Obviously, and you can see that massively in corporate worlds, especially females who climb the corporate ladder, who are working in a male-dominated society, tend to have to put on a switch on that very masculine energy to survive in that world. And like it's the same with men. Men have a feminine energy as well. We all have that balance. The problem is when we have one dominates more than the other, and we don't understand that we do have another element to it, and it's about balancing that out. And sometimes the masculine energy is needed, sometimes the feminine energy is needed. Depends on the situation you're in, how you want to show up in certain situations. But that balance is key, and it definitely does not make you any less of a man. And the question I ask people is, what is your definition of a man? Because man, it's a word, man, woman, female, male. It's a human terminology. Deep down, it means nothing. We all have masculine and feminine energy, and when we start to balance out and realize that, then that whole thinking of feeling like a man or feeling like a woman becomes irrelevant, because it's about feeling like a human being, regardless whether you're male, female, whatever. And that's the point, is it's not I'm a man, so this is what I should do, or I'm a female, this is what I should do. It's okay, I'm a human being, and this is how I want to show up in the world, and the impact I want to have, regardless of what gender I am, because it doesn't mean anything when it comes to the big picture kind of thing.
I think we got lost somewhere along the line in thinking that masculine and feminine had anything to do with gender.
Yeah.
And something that I always teach when it comes to masculine and feminine with our coaching clients is actually, let's take away all the connotations and look at this through the lens of alpha and omega. So alpha becomes the masculine and omega becomes the feminine, because when you start talking and using the terminology of alpha and omega, suddenly it's not about male or female or masculine and feminine, about being girly or about being manly. It starts to take away some of those subconscious connotations that we hold. And I think that then becomes a much easier entry point to then explore our essence. And it's so interesting, because I also, so in the fitness world, it's a very male dominating environment. You know, you might have in a, let's say your typical health club, it's definitely changed now, but you know, 20 years ago, it was, you know, you'd have maybe one female for every 10 guys, right? So I was in that industry, a bit like John's mentioned, I was more and more into my masculine, which actually what I needed so much for part of my healing journey was to move into that feminine, into that omega a lot more and address the emotion. So it's so interesting that these dynamics are always at play, and how when we're so unaware of them, we tend to struggle. We tend to struggle to then move forward and kind of uncover what we need.
I wonder if both of you were butting heads at one point in time because you both had too much masculine energy.
Oh yes,
that's why it worked.
Big time. Yeah.
That's interesting. You know, but in saying all of that, and I do want, we're going to shift gears here in a minute, but I just think this is a really interesting tack because I'm enjoying your take on this. And you know, I like the alpha omega spin on it, but we'll stick with masculine and feminine for this point in time because I think for those people listening, it's still valuable to hear it in those terms. We hear a lot about toxic masculinity. We very rarely hear about positive masculinity and healthy masculine energy. And that's something that I'm really, really interested in because I think that masculinity has a really, you know, a powerful role to play in our world. I know both of you are really actually very much committed to developing a better, you know, more sustainable world and environment. What role do you see healthy, like what do you see as healthy masculine energy, and what role do you see that in terms of playing, in terms of making a better world for us?
I think it comes down to understanding first and foremost, what is it? Like, what are we talking about when we say masculine energy and when we say feminine energy? Because there's a crossover in many ways, and it's about us having an awareness of then how does it play out in our life? Like, I know that when I'm in wellness theory mode in terms of the business side of things, I go into that masculine energy big time, and that serves its purpose because it drives me forward with structure. It drives me forward with logic, but then the whole ethos behind it all is coming very much from that feminine, coming from that flow, the emotional charge that's driving this, and it helps me to move into flow for more of the creative elements. It helps me with coaching to be able to again have that dance of both of them, so that clients can get that element of kind of almost structure and clear, logical way of thinking, let's say, and then at the same time be able to hold space for the emotion and all of the other things that are coming up in that space as well. So I think if we can all start to become more aware, more understanding of one, what is it for us and where does it show up in our lives, in our essence, then we get to look at how are we projecting that into the world. And I think when we start to do that, we can start to leverage the masculine and the feminine, and we can start to actually say, oh, do you know what? Okay, this is the energy I need today. Let's tap into this and have the know-how how to tap into that, because you need to show up in a certain way, because it's part of your mission or whatever it is you're trying to do in the world.
Yeah, well, that's a really fantastic way of expressing it. I appreciate that. And I was struggling to sort of phrase the question in a way that I wanted, but you actually handled that quite well. I think at one point in time, both of you would have dealt with crippling insecurity, and both connected to your internal world and to your physical appearance. And how did you navigate out of that?
For me, my insecurity was, again, in those kind of first 10 years as a personal trainer in the fitness industry. And that's why I kind of ate the way I did, I trained the way I did, because I thought I had to look and act a certain way. Otherwise, I'm not credible, or people think I'm not good enough. And when I went from there into a managerial position, again, that compounded itself even more. And I was thinking, okay, now I've got to act like a manager. And that's when my masculine energy went literally like, it stepped up by about 1,000%. It's went crazy. I became a dictator pretty much. And I thought that's how I had to go. I got results, but people were scared of me. That's why I got results, because they didn't want to upset me. And I went through that for a long time before I realized that, because my insecurities came from comparing myself to other people who were in high positions or been longer. And I said, okay, obviously these people might be better than me, or they've been there longer, or they look better than me. So I have to keep training harder, or I've got to act more aggressively. I've got to do this, I've got to do that to keep up with these people. And when I start to realize that it really doesn't matter, like I can't compare myself to anyone, because I'm just setting myself up for failure every single time, because I've got strengths that people have not got, and they've got strengths that I haven't got. And it's all about that working together. It's about that networking, that community. And I think when I realized that I can't do everything on my own, and that it's about it's kind of relaying your strengths and then working with people who've got strengths you haven't got and marrying those together, which kind of like what me and Charlotte have done.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's like that's when I started to think, actually, it doesn't matter what other people are doing. It doesn't matter where they are, because they're different from me. Their purpose is different from mine. Their direction is different from mine. So I've just got to focus on me. And when I started to realize that it's only about me, what my purpose is, what my direction is, and what impact I want to have, that insecurity went. And now I know if anyone asks me, like, "Are you good?" Like, I'm awesome. I'm good at everything I do. And it's not about I'm better than anyone else. It's just that I'm good. I know what I'm good at doing.
You're very self-assured.
I'm very self-assured. Yeah, and we've spoken to people recently. Like, we had a massive events recently. We spoke to people who were like, as we see, like these are people where we want to be in terms of not as we want to be like them or want to be exactly where they are, but in terms of impact. And we know that what we're doing is going in that direction, but we never ever compare ourselves thinking, "Oh, damn, I wish I was there," or like these guys are much better than we are. No, they've just been doing it for longer.
Absolutely.
Because they started before we did, so we're in the right direction. They just got time on us, and that's when I realized that it's okay, great. We just got to focus on what we're doing in the present, because that's going to have that big impact we want in the future.
So, you said you used to compare yourself to other people.
Yeah.
What do you compare yourself to, or maybe what do you anchor yourself to now in terms of guidance and direction if you're not going by the opinions of other people or the position of other people?
It's more about role modeling rather than comparing. And I think when you shift that gear, I think you're then paying attention in a resourceful way, rather than from a place of really of inspiration and admiration, rather from a place of lack and that sense of not enoughness. So I think if we can shift those gears from, hey, okay, who am I modeling? Why am I modeling that person? What is it that we're moving towards here? Because often when we compare ourselves to another in any life area or any personal area, it's coming usually from that idea of we're not enough. And anybody that's experiencing that, and just to answer your previous question from my perspective, it was my biggest insecurity. It always come back to being not enough, right? No matter what the thing was, whether it was physical appearance or performance or anything like that, it always come back down to this not enoughness. And I think if anybody can relate to that, that's watching this, get specific. What are you talking about? Because we use that statement so flippantly and such a generalization. It's, I'm not good enough. And then we stop. It's like, okay, good enough for what specifically? Okay. And is that a skill set issue? Is there a limiting belief that's present there? Let's untangle that and actually let's get into it, explore it, because only then can we then start to shift gears and move forward.
Yeah, I love that, because I hear this story a lot from people. It's a narrative, and then we act. Narratives are kind of how we, or stories are kind of how we try to put words or explain our behaviors in one sense, and they're congruent with very often with beliefs that we hold or an identity that how we see ourselves to be. So we'll act in congruence with our identity and our beliefs. So I encounter this a lot where people they wouldn't verbalize it this way, but I can tell just by their behavior. I go, your behavior is essentially telling me without you saying the words, I am not enough, and I'm actually trying to prove that true, which is this really interesting quirk of our brain, where when we believe a story to be true, our brain, in our primal brain, trying to keep us safe, will actually keep us acting in congruence with that story or that identity piece. So how do you turn around an identity or a story when you've been living out this I am not enough for years and years? How do you turn that around?
Emotion. I think emotion is the gateway, right? Because often a lot of our thoughts and our identity and the story, the narrative, all of this, it's fueled obviously from our conditioning, so our past experiences until now, right? And those past experiences come in form of story and they come in form of emotion too, right? And that emotion at some point fuels that quality of thinking. And that is where we can actually consciously start to learn how to interrupt the pattern. And when we start to do that, we do that through recognizing the emotional charge that we have over these ideas about ourselves and this identity. When we can let go of that emotion and start to move past that, suddenly the thoughts and that story doesn't have as much power because it's not being fueled by this emotional energy. So if we can learn to let go of the emotion that's attached to these stories, and then once we've let go of the emotion, then we can start to actually look at the story from more of an objective place. I think that is really a very crucial entry point to anybody's experience, in our experience.
Yeah. So when you say interrupt the pattern, what does that look like for someone in practice?
In practice, that might look different for everybody, of course, but usually there's two ways, right? There's usually we're so much in the identity, we're so much in the emotion, we're being consumed by it. Something happens, let's say, for example, you are short or snappy with a loved one in a relationship. Sometimes the primal nature takes over, like you described earlier, and it's done.
Jonathan's hungry and tired.
Yeah, and then it's happened, right? And you're like, oh no, you know what just happened. But so afterwards, you can then actually interrupt the pattern via delay. So afterwards, it's about taking that time to reflect. When you are back in a resourceful state and you're actually a bit more rational because that emotion is discharged a little bit, you can now look a bit, okay, well, what led to that? What was the build up to that? What happened? Was I hungry? Was I tired? Was I triggered by a past trauma that I haven't dealt with? You can start to ask these questions, and you can almost start to interrupt the pattern from after the effect. But the other side of it is to explore the story, or explore the things, the pattern, essentially the thing that you actually want to shift before you get to that point. It's rare that a lot of people do that in the beginning because we're consumed by our experience. But at some point, when you've experienced something enough, you start to observe it. So I always say there's three phases that we tend to go through. We tend to go through this being consumed by the problem, being in the problem. Then we move into this observation. We can see it playing out. It still might be playing out at times, but we're starting to observe it. We're seeing how it all unfolds. But then we get to shift into the third stage, which is like the creator space, where we actually now get to create our experience, because we know that when we're tired and hungry, maybe that's going to be a consequence. We snap at a loved one, even though we don't mean it, right? But the reality is because I'm coming from a place of creation now, I make sure I sleep well, I make sure I eat well, I take care of myself so that I can actually spend my energy elsewhere. And that then becomes a real, again, shift in gears, because now you get to move from being completely consumed to actually somebody that's creating your life experience, I think. And when we go from that extent, that's when we can then lead into impact and more powerful things like that. I hope that answers your question.
No, that was beautiful. I love it. I think I'm asking reasonably challenging questions here. I'm trying to anyways, because I really want to dig into your brains and into your expertise, because I think you guys are doing phenomenal work in the world. And that's why I also want to get things, because sometimes when we're experts in this space, it can be easy to sort of operate in this high level space using terminology that we're all familiar with, but an outside observer is like, what the heck? And so I try to liken it to meeting people at the ground floor versus shouting at them from the 10th floor. So coming down to their level and saying, let's, and it's not to say that we're better, but it's just that we're further down the path. I mean, we talk about, you kind of describe debriefing an experience, because I use the language, I say compassionate awareness is the first step to change. And deliberately include the word compassion in there, because sometimes we can become aware of our behaviors and use that as turn into like judgment or self-abuse or anger or frustration. But compassionate awareness means we're aware that this behavior doesn't help. It's not a good pattern of behavior. But let's try to understand why it's happening. We start to chain it backwards a little bit, and we have like a little bit of a mini debrief. So the next time that we start to move into that pattern, we go, okay, I know what's happening here. Now, when the emotion takes over, sometimes it's a little difficult to interrupt that, and that pattern sort of has to play itself out. But each time that happens, it starts to lose its powers a little bit more and a little bit more. And so you also use the terminology, let go of the emotion. This one's, I think, a little bit trickier still, but how do you let go of an emotion?
Right. So first, let's give you some context of what we mean by emotion and what emotion are we supposed to be letting go of here. So, do you want me to go?
Well, you go?
Yeah, okay. We talk about this stuff all day, so stop me at some point. So basically, we're all carrying around this backpack of emotional charge from the past, right? We all have these personal experiences that we've held on to emotion for whatever reason. Sometimes we hold on to the feelings of our past experience because it's a form of protection.
Yep.
Sometimes it's because it helps us feel like we're enough. And actually, sometimes we gain something from having these emotions. But actually, as we know on a health level, when we're carrying around these low vibrational emotions, these negative emotions, we actually are doing harm to ourselves, right? Because they are, again, in our system, they're toxic, they are affecting our nervous system and how physically we're reacting, okay? And so when we get so many of these, we call this stress compounding. So when we get so many of these past experiences that would just add up, imagine that backpack, you just put another emotional experience into the backpack. At some point, that backpack gets too heavy. That stress compounds so much, right, that we get to our tipping point, right? And we start to overspill. Maybe that comes in the way we communicate. Maybe it comes in our behaviors. Maybe we're spiraling. Maybe we're angry. Maybe we're actually verbalizing things that we don't want to be even saying, let alone thinking, right? We get to this point and it overspills differently for everybody. So anybody that's watching this or listening to this and you know that you're not responding in the way that you want to, or things just keep almost happening, you just haven't got the control over it, that's a clear sign that your stress is compounded to a point where it now is demanding your attention. Right? Because if you do not now pay attention to it, you are going to continue to spiral. Your body, your system is going to start to have these adverse effects. It's going to start to suffer more. So your likelihood is you're going to get more sick more frequently. That then turns into other different types of dis-ease and discomfort, etc. So what we want to do is pay attention when it gets to, well, before ideally it gets to that point, but that's usually when the clues are present. So when we notice those emotions coming up, that stress coming up, right? That's our opportunity to say, okay, how is this serving me? First of all, recognizing it. What is the feeling? And it might be that you can label it. It might be that you can't. And it might be that you can just feel it and you know it's there and you're aware of its presence. That's the first thing, is acknowledging it, allowing it to be, right? Because often we resist it. And that just like stuffing it all back in the backpack as much as you can. And again, at some point, it's still going to burst, right, at the seams. Yeah. So I
call it putting like black electrical tape over the check engine light.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly like that. And so what we need to do is we need to first become aware and acknowledge what's going on. We need to check, okay, how is this serving me now? Because at some point in your life, maybe that emotion was serving you, and that's okay, right? But the reality is it serving you now, today, in this moment? If the answer to that is no, then okay, how about we just, let it go, and we make a decision in that moment to say, what else could be in its place? Let's say it's grief or shame or fear. What else would actually lead to a more serving experience for me now? Would it be to come from a place of peace, love, gratitude, just being neutral even? Maybe it's going to take a bit of courage, right? But what's going to show up in its place? What are you deciding in this moment that is going to serve you better? Because as we start to make that choice into courage, into peace, into love, whatever emotion that excites you, right, pick the one that serves you. And when you start to lean into that, you're already letting go of the old stuff. So that's something practical people can at least maybe start to do now.
Yeah. So when talking about letting go, will people experience maybe a sense of grief or loss because it actually involves letting go of maybe an integral part of their past or their life story?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I think we need to have that conversation, that inner dialogue at the same time. Is this serving me? What will serve me instead? Because when we start to focus on, okay, well, what's going in its place, right? We start to almost dilute the idea of loss, because actually we're being filled by something that's now much more serving. We're not just saying let go of the emotions and then we are like, well, who am I without these negative emotions, right? No, actually what we're encouraging here is you learn from it. And when you take a deep learning, well, that's when we get to transform, right? Change and transformation comes from growth. It comes from learning. And I think when we can start to look at, okay, well, what is present when this other thing isn't present? Well, it's so much easier to let go of the other thing, right? Because now we're being motivated by a form of pleasure rather than a form of pain.
Absolutely. And you touched on that trapped emotions lead to harm and sickness. And I'm very much in agreement with this. I don't know if it can be a direct sort of one-to-one linear correlation, but I think what we can say is that when there are these emotional energies or distress trapped in our body, that it will at some point manifest itself in some kind of physical dis-ease or sickness. And so what has been I mean, I know, Jonathan, you kind of have this experience with chronic pain. And that was kind of how it was manifesting in your body. And Charlotte, did you have something similar where this was manifesting itself and these trapped emotions were kind of manifesting itself in sort of sickness or dis-ease? I'm using deliberately dis-ease as a pronunciation, but
So for me, it really twofold. For me, it's lower back pain that would come and go. So again, chronic, not quite as disabling and crippling. I think that Jonathan experienced, and I'm sure other people listening to this may have experienced, but it was something that I was very aware of. It would affect how I would train, how I would exercise, but I would almost excuse it. And I didn't really address the lower back issue with emotion at all. I just suddenly noticed one day it's not there. And I could see the correlation. But the other thing, and this is something I still work on today, is tension. So sometimes it's not the extremes of dis-ease or injury and these kinds of things. Sometimes it is just we're carrying tension. And I know that there is still tension in my body. I'm very aware of it. I don't judge it now. I used to, but now I know that I need to, in my lifestyle, I need to create the environment and the situations and the behaviors and the habits that allow me to continue every day, let go of a bit more tension, let go of a bit more, because it's safe to now, right? Yeah. Back in the day when I was collecting all this tension, like it was there for a reason, right? It was to protect. But now it's, okay, no, it's safe to let this go. It's safe to experience this fluidity within my body. And I think that's kind of how it's manifested for me.
So is it safe to let it go? Because I think here's where coaching becomes really powerful and valuable. But is it safe to let it go because you're also connected to another safe human being?
I think it definitely plays a part. Absolutely.
Because there's, and my own sort of thinking on this is that when we are alone and feel isolated, our primal brain will take over and say being vulnerable is not safe in this moment because we're alone and we are isolated. And then when we connect ourselves to another human being who, in a sense, we could say has our back, we know that now we're in a safe space to be vulnerable because this other person is there sort of in a, I don't want to say in a protective role, because I really think of coaching as a collaboration more than that. But we create kind of a, for lack of a better term, a safe space for somebody to be vulnerable and to experience and process this. So what is that like when you're working with somebody in a coaching capacity?
I think it takes a lot of like preparation, as it were. Okay, whenever somebody comes into coaching with us, we know they're in pain, right? They tell you from day one what they're experiencing, and you know they're in pain, and there's nothing you want more as a coach. And I'm sure you resonate with this. Yeah. You just want to take it away from them. If you could, you would, right? You don't want to see how it's manifesting. You don't want to think of anybody suffering, right? But the reality is it takes a bit of time to get people to slowly open up to the process of letting go because of all the things that we've already described, because who are they without it? They're already feeling lost. Now you take away the one thing that's so powerful for them. Whoa, no, that's even worse, right? You're adding to the problem. So it takes a lot of like warming up. It takes a lot of warming up, a lot of understanding. So when we coach, we are looking from the physical body and what's going on there. We're also looking at, okay, well, how is this manifesting for them? What are the thought patterns? We're helping them to understand on a scientific level, to an extent that person wants to, what is going on as well. And that can also provide some comfort that they actually realize their body is the thing that has their back. If they nurture it in the way that it needs to, they don't need somebody else there. Yes, it definitely helps, and definitely it provides comfort and that safety. But I think the other key thing in a coaching relationship is almost like a permission. Yeah. At some point along the line, it's almost like we need an external permission to be able to move forwards. And a big part of it sometimes is them knowing that it's okay, right? It's okay to let this stuff out. The amount of times we're sitting across from somebody and they just talking about something that maybe we could be talking about quite easily, that they just burst into tears. Like, I don't know why I'm crying. And it's like, okay, that's okay. It's coming out. That's cool. That's fine. Like, let it come. Let it flow. Let's explore what's kind of going on here, and if that's appropriate. And I think a big part of it comes is suddenly they have permission. Suddenly they're like, oh, it is safe. It is okay. It is natural. It is normal to be where I am. And like we said earlier, when we get to that point, that's when we start honoring. And they actually give the permission to themselves, because they never needed our permission in the first place, right? They just needed to give it to themselves to be able to move forward.
Very often I think of coaching as just being further down a path that somebody else would like to travel. And very often, and you mentioned wanting to take away the pain and the struggle of the people you work with, but you actually can't. And I think that'll actually be dishonoring them and disempowering to them, because ultimately the goal is to equip them with the tools to do this themselves, rather than, saying like, I'm the guru, you're the dummy. That's not how it actually works. And so if someone is going to work with you, do they get the both of you, or do they work with one or the other, or is there like
so our coaching program is 12 months, and they work with the both of us over the 12 months. Their first initial session is always with both of us, because we go into obviously their physical, mental, emotional health, and then from there, depending on their needs, and where we're going to start with them, depending on obviously where their kind of important goals are. They'll either start with Charlotte, or they'll start with myself, have a mix of the both of us, spend more time with Charlotte, more time with me, depending on what their goals are and what they really need at that moment in time.
Yeah, that's absolutely awesome. I could just keep asking you guys questions. I love picking your brains, and because I love hearing this from a different perspective than my own. Like, I think you're very aligned with kind of the work that I do as well, and that's why I really wanted to talk to both of you. I'm trying not to say you guys, because I know it's a natural sort of colloquial term, but I'm like with the two of you. I've just really loved both your willingness to share your own story, to be vulnerable, to share like how you got to where you're at. I think it's really helpful for people that are maybe wanting to go on a similar journey. They're like, I want to get past the chronic pain. I want to get past the emotional distress. I want to get past these things. You're in one sense kind of like a beacon of hope for them, saying, hey, it is possible, because you were the Incredible Hulk, and Charlotte, I don't know if you have a nickname or had a nickname back then, but you were suffering.
I didn't know what it was.
But it's really powerful, and something you're both passionate about as well is sustainable development. And what does that mean to you, and why are you passionate about it?
Our whole mission is about getting people to understand that when they're healthy and well, they become a force for good. And there are so many topics, so many things that need our attention in the world right now, that when we are, a big majority of the population are so stuck in that spiral of chaos and stress that they're not thinking about that, because they've got so much going on that they're stuck in a little bubble. But when they start to look after themselves and they start to pay attention to themselves, they step out of all the chaos and they start to look at the bigger picture and go, oh, okay, life is easier. Now it's easier. It's like, I want to do something. I want to make a difference somehow. Whether that's a small impact from a huge impact, it's helping to create that ripple effect. Because if everyone just thinks about themselves only for the rest of their lives, the world's not going to basically survive much longer.
We're going to tear ourselves apart.
Yeah, and as human beings, we're tribal in nature. We need community, and the problem is as cities grow bigger and bigger and bigger, we lose that sense of community, and people withdraw into themselves even more. So to be able to have that impact in the world, whether it's making a small difference, big difference, focusing on the environment, focusing on hunger, focusing on whatever it is that people have a passion about, they've got to be able to not only connect with themselves, but step out and look about, okay, what can I do now to help others? And that's what we find as a kind of a natural next step for our coaching clients when they do that work for themselves. They tend to ask that question: is how can I now give back?
Yeah. Which is absolutely phenomenal. I want to hear what you have to share as well, Charlotte. But I just love that, the fact that when somebody works with you, your goal isn't just to turn their own life around, so now they have some sort of ideal, perfect life. It's to help them so that they can turn and pay it forward. So there becomes this massive ripple effect.
Yeah.
A big part of that was inspired by our clients as well. Like, don't get me wrong, when we've been through our own journeys, like we've obviously created wellness theory, and we see the ripple effects that has. But a big part of that was because we wanted to be of service. Suddenly we felt so empowered in a way that we'd never felt before, and so free and so confident to be able to move forward and create that's when wellness theory was born. But when we really had that shift into, no, our clients are telling us they want to do something bigger and bolder at the end of this. So it's like, okay, well, how do we bring that into their journey so that they can see that link together? And I think it's also a huge part of the lasting change element of what we do. Because if anybody that's listening to us knows us already, you know that we hate quick fixes. We hate the idea of these overnight one session and done kind of approaches to wellness. And
sure, you go to a weekend seminar and you feel all
Yeah.
jacked up like you're going to conquer the world, and the truth is you can't accomplish 10 years worth of work in a weekend.
Exactly. And a big part then of that lasting change comes from the perspective, that the lens has widened. When you get to that point of now I want to go and do even more good, and I want to impact and I want to make a difference, like John said, no matter how big or small, that then just becomes this new lens that you look at life, and it's very hard to then go back from that.
Mm-hmm.
Like it would be a very significant emotional experience that might push you backwards. But even then, you would never go back to the place that you've been because of everything you're now equipped with. And that is where that sustainability element comes into not only the personal journey, but then that societal journey as well.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. Like in my own journey, it's really about being an ethical omnivore, and I might have never thought about it in the past, but I'm comfortable being an omnivore, but now I want to be a lot more thoughtful about how I consume and what I consume and where it's coming from, and how animals are being raised and so on. And so I think it's really interesting just seeing that shift. And you probably look back at yourself, and I know I do. I look back and I go, I don't even recognize that person that I was 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. Like, it's hard to imagine that I was in that place, and yet I think it's important to keep that as a part of your story, because it's what gives people hope.
Yeah, 100%. I think it keeps you grounded as well. It definitely keeps us grounded.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, I've hogged a lot of your time. We went a little bit over, but I just love asking you guys questions. You've had some really, really wonderful insights. If you could give one more juicy sound bite to kind of wrap things up. I know you don't like quick fixes, but maybe one word or one thought of kind of encouragement for people that have listened to this and they felt like, it's possible for me to make a change. What would you like to share with them?
You go first.
For me, if people can understand that obviously there is no right or wrong. Whatever is happening in your life right now is where you're meant to be. Like it might not feel good at that time, and that's okay. Like it's just wherever you are right now is where you are meant to be. Now, if you are where you want to be, but you think, okay, I don't like where I am right now, you have the power to change that. It's just understanding and becoming aware of how. And everyone has the answers. It's just you just got to again find them, and and you can't find them when you're in it. And this is where obviously like what we do, what other coaches like you do, we help guide people to find those answers. They know them already. They just don't know they know.
You've stolen my one there, 'cause that was where I was going to say. I thought, okay, he said the no right or wrong. And I thought, cool, then I've still got mine. But then he snagged it at the end. But I think it just goes to show just how on the same page we are. And I think how simple sometimes it can be is that we do have the answers within. We just don't know that we do sometimes. And that support in navigating it then becomes the key. And I think sometimes that comes from asking questions that are useful and then asking other people who have been down that path as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, thank you so much for being very generous, both with your time and your insight, and sharing your stories. It's been incredibly powerful. I know those who have tuned in to the live broadcast, they got some genuine value from it. And I've got some value from it as well. I love these conversations because they always give me new ideas and I feel refreshed and energized. So thank you again for your time. And this is Wellness Unplugged. Thank you, everybody who tuned in and watched. It's been a pleasure sharing this with you, and stay tuned for our next broadcast on Friday.